Hi guys, this is Round the Table with Josh and Darragh, a conversational podcast from your two favourite idiots. That's Josh.
And that's Darragh.
This is an off-the-cuff conversation between two friends who don't take themselves very seriously.
And neither should you.
Oh, and we don't check our facts thoroughly.
And neither should you.
Hope you enjoy the podcast. Thanks for listening. Hello guys, and welcome back to another Round the Table with Josh and Darragh.
Welcome back.
We're in a new venue today. We're at Josh's flat rather than my flat. We've got a lovely setup.
Yeah.
Finally got ourselves an actual mic.
Yeah.
For all you mic aficionados out there, we're using a Blue Yeti.
A Blue Yeti Blackout.
Blackout.
Yeah, Blackout.
Is that what it's called?
That's
Wonderful.
it. Full black.
Full black. Yeah, it is. It is a big black contraption. We've also got ear headphones on.
Indeed.
So we can actually hear how it sounds and everything. It is quite. It's quite strange. It's quite intense. It's quite ASMR-y.
It's very weird. I did a lot of kind of ASMR shit earlier on when I first got the mic.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
Whispering and clicking into this.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I realised is I can actually sit a little bit further away from the mic and it's okay.
Indeed. Let's turn it.
Yeah.
Ooh, there we go.
There you go. Cool. So big news today for
The
Josh and
podcast.
I.
Indeed.
We got our first pod online
We did.
onto YouTube.
It feels very, very official now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know. It was quite exciting. It took us quite a long time to work out actually how to get it from A to B. It was one thing recording the audio. It's a much different thing getting it onto YouTube.
Yeah, definitely.
Fairly laborious process, but we finally done it, which is quite exciting, and looking forward to hear what people have got to say about that.
Indeed. And I would like to apologise as well, guys, because you might hear some cars going past, and I live on the route to the Garton Naval Hospital, so we might hear a couple of sirens going past.
A couple of sirens, but that's how you know it's real.
It shows the authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, we're a podcast for the people.
Yeah, by the people.
By the people, for the people.
Of the people.
Of the people. And yeah, we don't have any fancy studio.
No.
As of yet. You never know what will happen.
Well, we do have some blankets up against the window.
We do, yeah. It feels a lot more official than the last two did. Yeah. And it's a lot comfier as well. Yeah. These sofas are comfy. These are the ones we had in the flat last year when we lived together.
Yep.
They're very nice.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So what are we going to talk about today, Josh?
Well, I think we should start with your little mishap earlier on today.
Oh, God.
Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I got locked in my toilet. I live with my parents, and the toilet next to my room, I got locked in it. So basically, there was some workmen in today, and I was kind of aware that they were about, so I properly locked the door and everything while I was just going for to use the toilet, and then when I came back, the handle wasn't screwed in. Well, no, it was screwed in, but the little kind of fissure or whatever you need that goes between the handle into the rod that goes through, and we're getting incredibly technical here, so sorry if we lose you, but basically it wasn't turning, so I was locked. So I called my dad like 6 times. I knew he was in the house. No response. I texted the family WhatsApp and I said, can somebody let me in? And my mum called me, but she was out, so she couldn't help. Yeah. So she called Dad and didn't get a response. So I started to get a bit... I have to say I was a bit claustrophobic at one point. It's got no windows. And it is quite an intense environment.
Bathroom, anyway.
I don't think... It's not maybe the most intense bathroom, but I think just being in a room which has no windows and is reasonably small, if you realise that you can't get out. Yeah. And I think I am a little bit claustrophobic as a person. Yeah. I've had it on the tube before. Mm-hmm. I told you about that. The weekend that we went to the Big Feed in Southside. Yeah. And I was getting on the train. I got on the tube and we were getting off at Ibrox. Mm-hmm. Well, it was just me. I was getting off at Ibrox, and it was 20 to 3, and there was a 3 o'clock kickoff Rangers were playing Motherwell or something.
Yeah.
And it was literally wall-to-wall football fans.
Yeah.
Like, a guy elbowed me in the face drinking Buckfast, and they were singing sectarian songs, and I don't know if you know, I'm a Celtic fan, so it was all just quite intense, and it was
We've
very
just lost half the
claustrophobic.
viewers, Darragh.
Other teams are available, but it was pretty intense. I had to get out. But going back to the toilet, I realised I couldn't stress. I had to just find out what to do. So basically, on the door, the handle, part of the handle, like kind of ornamental part of it, was restricting me being able to get at the rod that would turn it. So I kind of looked through what I had in the bathroom, and I found some tweezers. So I was like some sort of like
MacGyver.
Yeah, that's what I said on the Instagram. So it was like I was, some sort of Jason Bourne. I was like using the tweezers to try and take off that ornamental bit so I could get in at the rod. But by the time I'd done that, my mum couldn't get in contact with Dad, so she called Ian, the workman, who'd been doing some work, and they were just about to get in the car and leave, and I heard the doorbell go, and I was like, who's at the door? It was him coming back after he'd spoken to my mum to then help me get in. It was all just incredibly embarrassing, I have to admit, but we got out and it was okay.
God, I cannot imagine being those workmen.
But you were telling me you've had a few, because I called you while I was in the toilet.
Yeah, we had a nice wee conversation.
We were meant to do the podcast a bit earlier, and you said, oh, what time are you coming up? And I said, I might be a little bit late. I'm currently locked in my toilet in my house.
Yeah.
But you said you had a few incidents of...
Being, locked up. Well, when I first started working in Tesco's, I worked in the bakery. And there's a big kind of walk-in freezer. And whenever I first joined, I was going in to take some stuff out of the freezer to defrost, and I heard the door close behind me, and I was like, "Oh no!" And I went over and I started pushing the door, and the door wasn't moving at all, and I was like, "Oh shit! Is this how my story ends? Is this the end of it?"
Seriously, did it not have a latch on the inside?
Well, I couldn't see anything. I was pushing, and I was like, "Shit!" Okay, so I took my phone out. And I checked, and I didn't have any signal.
Oh my! Yeah, because it's a big metal box.
It's a big metal box, yeah. So I was like, "Crap! Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, everyone else is out on the floor. Like, how am I gonna get out of this? I could try banging, but I don't think I was gonna hear." And then, fortunately, I moved some frozen cookies out of the way, and I found a big green button. I was like, "Thank God!"
Yeah, it's almost like a pendant on the end of a metal rod, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's one at work where I work which has that, because they're quite scary as well. And I think the immediate cold does put the fear of God into you. Yeah. I think immediately you're like, this could be dangerous.
I was in there for a good kind of 10 minutes before I figured out.
10 minthat's
Yeah,
that is quite stressful.
It seems a lot longer. I felt like James Franco in 127 Hours. That's my.
You're gonna have to cut off a limb or something.
I'll try and use it to work my way out.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
That would be my origin story.
One of the things I wonder is, if you did get genuinely stuck in the freezer at a job, how long would it take your colleagues to work out that you were in that predicament? I mean, it's because they know that you're in the back.
Yeah, well, they'd probably, because you've got the shift leader moving about quite a lot. He goes kind of like back and forth from the shop floor to the back. And I imagine they'd probably see, but they'd probably think I was maybe in the toilet, because they'd look into the bakery and there'd be no one there. And the door would be closed as it normally is.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like, at first...
They probably would have thought either I'd gone to the toilet, I was out on the floor doing something, or maybe I was around in the chill, which is a big fridge similar thing. Or the last thing that they probably would check is just to make sure that I didn't do a runner from the job and just went out for a pint.
But what I'm wondering is like, because at the restaurant that I work at, similar thing is there is a walk-in fridge. It's downstairs. You go downstairs, you go past the customer toilets into the staff area where we hang our bags, and there's lockers and other toilets there, and then there's a stock room, and then there's a little prep area, and there's the walk-in fridge. It's right at the end of like quite a long walk from the floor. And because the restaurant's normally very busy, I wonder if it being more busy, they would feel the loss of a member of staff quicker, or whether because it's so
What,
busy.
in the long term?
No, so what I'm saying is like
Yeah.
if it's like a slow day at the supermarket where you work,
Yeah.
if it's a slow day, they might be less inclined to notice that they're down a member of staff, because then it's not putting stress on the staff that's there.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a fast day in the restaurant and like say there's sections, we work in sections, and there's one section that's just vacant for like half an hour, I think they would then be like, what the hell's going on?
No.
But how long do you normally do the bakery for in the morning?
Probably around maybe 3 hours.
So if this happened at the beginning of your shift, there's a likelihood that you could have been in there for well over 3 hours.
I don't know how long you could survive in the chill. Actually, that'd be quite interesting to look up, because I know it's.
Well, I think the temperature.
We're in the minuses.
The temperature. It's not that cold. The temperature, I think, is normally like around the 0 mark.
That's
For
low.
the one that we're in.
Well, that's probably, is that a fridge or is that?
It is a cool room.
Yeah.
But I think the issue is there are liquids in there, so they don't have it below 1 degrees, because obviously the liquids would start to freeze.
Yeah.
So, like for instance, we have the kegs of beer that we keep in there. So I think it's actually between 0 and 2 degrees most of the time. It's just to keep this, and I think the stuff is rotated.
Our one's like a
regularly
freezer,
enough.
so
Oh,
it's
right,
like minus. I think it's like minus 15.
So it's minus 15 degrees.
Something, yeah. I think it's around that. I seem to remember that being the number. And yeah, like when you go inside it, you see literally icicles hanging from the ceiling.
Oh my god!
Like I felt like it was like an Arctic cave. Apologise for the.
Yeah, that's the ambulance. The first one.
Someone's
I wonder how
gonna
many
get
we'll
back.
have today.
Yeah.
In the pod, but yeah.
Well, yeah, it's very busy. But yeah, no. So that was an interesting little event. Then when I was working down in France in a school as well, I remember I got trapped in the toilet, and I couldn't get out because the door was jammed, and the other people I was living with, they weren't in at the time, and I was in there for about 40 minutes or something like that. It was crazy, and then I ended up missing the class or being very late.
So this is when,
to one.
just to clarify, this is in your year abroad.
Yeah, my year. I worked as
You're a French undergraduate student.
Yeah. I was a language assistant in a couple of French high schools.
Yeah.
In the Alps.
So you were meant to be teaching a
I
class.
was meant to be teaching. I was trapped in the toilet in my flat.
So when you went in to explain to the teacher that you were late, how did they take the excuse? I'm really sorry, I was physically jammed into my toilet.
No, they were fine because like and especially initially, like I wasn't. It was just kind of, it was during the period where they just kind of brought me in and I'd kind of learned how things work. This is before they kind of gave me my.
Okay,
my
so you
own
weren't
stuff
meant to be leading a class at this
No,
point.
fortunately not. But fortunately, the teacher was there and took it. But yeah, so that was a bit of a dodgy situation. But that's pretty much all the times I can think where I've been trapped and it's actually had consequences.
There isn't a huge other number of times I've been trapped, but there have been a few times when I've been working.
Mm-hmm.
It happened more at the bar that I used to work at. I'm not going to divulge names because it's not necessarily bad on the bar, but
for legal reasons.
Yeah, just for legal reasons. There was a couple of times when I went into the toilet and I would be doing a number 2, and then I would realise that there was no toilet paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been at work and phoned the work phone.
Oh God.
And had a colleague pick it up and say, I don't really know how to do this, but could you pop some toilet paper into the men's toilets?
Just push it under the door.
Well, there wasn't under the door area. But
Oh,
luckily,
okay.
I mean, there was a couple of guys that I worked with who I was friendly enough with who just saw the funny side.
Yeah.
So they would just come in and I would like open the door a smidge and they would just chuck the toilet paper in. And,
So
and then,
vulnerable.
And then I would just be the laughing stock for the next half of the shift.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like nobody got hurt, but it was a bit embarrassing.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever had a really bad situation of like being in like a club toilet and going to the toilet and not having. Can you imagine? Like that is like a worse nightmare.
See, whenever we went to club, I'd always go to the toilet in clubs, and I genuinely I need the number 2, so I'd always go through to the toilet and actually like do my business, And every single time, the bouncers always thought I was doing drugs.
Yeah,
so
I've had this happen quite a few times as well. I remember one of the funniest times was after Slumber's birthday, and we all went to Mother India. So there was like 20 lads ate a curry, and then we went to Buff Club, and everybody was in and out of the toilets, and the bouncers obviously saw this big group of like young guys come in, and they were in the toilets all the time. And I remember actually being in at one point and having a piss, and Tree was in the toilet, and they were like banging on the toilet, and he was like, "I just need a poo, I'm sorry." Because they thought,
except that's exactly like what if I was a bouncer, that's what I'd be thinking. Especially if 8 guys went in at the same time, it'd be a different story in polo. But
yeah, I actually am pretty sure that one time in Nice and Sleazy's, which is a pretty grim toilets in my opinion, but one time I was in the toilets and I was using the urinal, and the door is one of those situations where the bottom of the door and like the very top of the door are cut off. I don't know if that's like for bouncers so they can look or whatever. I don't know if that's a thing.
Now they've got this like the car bomb.
Well, like the PSNI have. But no, there was two sets of feet
facing each other.
No,
one was facing away.
Both were facing the same way. There was like
both facing away from each other.
Both facing perpendicular to the toilet.
Yeah.
No, there was one set of boots, and then inside the set of boots were another set of shoes.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe, there was some light sodomy.
Just a dash of sodomy.
Just a little bit. I mean,
it really brings it all together.
Boys got to eat at the end of the day. But it wasn't a particularly romantic setting, I think.
I'd be more concerned if you saw an odd number of shoes, an odd number of feet.
What, like three? Just three shoes.
3 shoes, all facing the same way.
5 shoes.
5 shoes
would be even more. One shoe, maybe you can. But one shoe just could have a leg up for like balance. I don't know. We're getting probably way too into.
Yeah, so my GP recommended I do this.
Yeah. It's a prostate thing. It's to stretch my prostate.
Well, it's like I remember I was at school, kind of like halfway through it, they started putting up these signs in the toilets saying like no squatting on the toilets. I'm like, who the hell's doing that? But apparently that's what you're supposed to do for it's healthier. And it helps
it's like I remember I was in Hong Kong, and we went to this like really nice restaurant, but it was like a bit off the beaten track because Hong Kong's obviously got it was under British rule for a long time, so it's got a lot of quite touristy areas. But I think what happened was we kind of befriended the concierge at the hotel, and they were like, if you want to eat proper stuff where you're not going to pay through the nose, they gave us this reference for this restaurant. So we went to this restaurant, and it was like a fish place, but it like genuinely had, you've spent quite a bit of time in Asia, they have like the tanks of fish out the front, and there was literally a guy butchering the fish, or filleting, is it?
Filleting.
Do you butcher a fish?
You gut a fish and
gut and fillet.
Yeah.
So he was gutting and filleting the fish outside. Really nice food. But then when I went to the toilet, it was one of the old school like French shite from the heights, where it's literally it's like if you took the toilet seat and then just planted it in the ground.
Yeah.
But that is meant to be better for your bowel movements.
Yeah.
Because I have heard of things where you get essentially like little boxes for your feet that you put your feet on.
I think my gran's got one of those.
I wouldn't be surprised if you were getting older and it would maybe help with your bowel movements.
Yeah.
Yeah. But enough toilet chat. I feel like we have talked a lot about toilets.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about something else.
Yeah, definitely. So what's the first on the menu today?
Well, I thought we wanted to talk about it last week and we didn't get a chance. I think it's something that we're both quite interested in and we've done a little bit of research into. Is the whole Harry and Meghan Markle, the Megxit, as it's being called.
Oh, God.
So to kind of, for those of you who kind of don't know. It's pretty prominent news at the moment. But we'll just kind of we'll set the kind of boundaries of it.
In a world.
Do like a film trailer for Megxit.
In a divided world.
Essentially, Prince Harry and is it Princess Meghan?
Yeah,
the Sussexes.
Well, not anymore.
Well, not anymore now. Don't jump the gun.
Briefly,
they are rejecting their royal positions, their royal titles, and they want to become financially independent.
Indeed.
So there's been a lot of oohing and ahhing and trying to work out what does this mean, what are the repercussions. It looks like they want to spend their time between the UK and North America, be that Canada or potentially actually in America. I don't really know. I haven't spoken to Harry in a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah, so I think he's got a bit on, so I haven't really had a phone call with him in a bit. But it's quite interesting, and we looked a bit at the maths the other day, didn't we? And the whole sovereign fund, and so if because one of the things that people are kind of saying is that they get a lot of money from the government. I think it's 5% of their wealth comes from the sovereign fund, which is the money from the Crown Estate goes to the HMRC, and then 25% of that is relayed back to the royal family. And so they're rejecting the sovereign fund because they feel that kind of, if they're not going to do the public duties, then they shouldn't get that kind of money. But they still have a lot of independent wealth.
Yeah, definitely. Meghan's got a lot of money coming in from Suits.
Yeah, I think I read on one article that at one stage she was getting $38,000 an episode, which is quite a lot. And I think there's quite a few episodes in a Suits series. I think she did 12. Suits? I watched Suits. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I liked it. It was super contrived. I feel like it was really not like what real law is. I think there was a lot more bravado and ego, and they did so many illegal things.
Game of Thrones kind of.
Yeah, it was
kind of lawyers.
Yeah.
A little bit. No, I watched a little bit of it. I don't actually remember Meghan at all.
She was good in it. She was the love interest, and she. I think she was kind of one of the. I don't know what they call it when they're like first starting out. Is it paralegal or something?
B-listers.
Yeah, actually no. What she was I think she was a paralegal. So she wasn't one of the young lawyers. She was a paralegal who kind of does work for the lawyers. But she was so good that they brought her in, and then at one stage she kind of had her in office, blah, blah, blah. And then she was dating the... Do you know the premise of Suits?
I remember there was a young guy with a dirty briefcase and a good-looking guy with lots of nice suits. I remember that.
So, I think the beginning bit of it is there's this young guy and he sells weed. He's really smart, but he just doesn't have any... Sorry?
Evidently.
Yeah. But he doesn't have any direction. No. But he takes the bar for people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was it. Yeah.
That's how he makes money. Is he takes the bar for people, then they get onto the bar, and then he runs into the guy Harvey, who's actually a big professional lawyer, and essentially kind of ends up becoming a lawyer, even though he hasn't taken the bar, he hasn't gone to law school. He's really good at law because he's done the bar and he's intelligent and he picks stuff up really quickly. Yeah. But he hasn't done that, and so kind of a big trope of the series is Harvey and him trying to hide that he's basically an imposter, and then he dates Meghan Markle's character, and then she finds out blah, 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 blah.
Okay, because I remember I watched about maybe eight episodes or something like that of the first season, and I got so tired of it just because I just kind of all you did when you watched it was just kind of see them. They were presented a problem at the start. They're kind of like, oh, this problem is like unsurmountable, and then later on you're like, oh, they're never going to get it done, and then bam, they do an all-nighter and it's all sorted and everything's fine. And it was just the same thing over and over and over again. I got a bit tired of it.
I think sometimes some of these series that are kind of these long-lasting, almost dynastic series that follow the similar problem, can't solve it, overcome it, heroes win in the end kind of plot line. I think the issue with them is that they fundamentally started out as weekly shows, and if you watch them weekly, then it doesn't get as boring. But with Netflix and everything that we have now, I think it's more difficult for us to binge watch like hour shows that have a similar format. I've even found it now that it takes me longer to want to invest my time in a series because, like, I mean, I watched all the episodes of season 14 of It's Always Sunny the other day, but because there's 10 of them and they're 20 minutes, so that's 200 minutes. That's just over 3 hours. That's like a long film over a whole day, in and out of me doing other stuff. Like, it's not really that bad. But their stuff changes and they even play around with formats within it. You need to watch it. It's so funny.
Yeah.
But
I'm looking forward to it. Actually.
But I think Suits was a bit more like that. But going back to the matter at hand,
Sorry.
back to Harry and Meghan.
Tangent there.
I mean, I'm kind of in two minds about this.
Yeah.
Personally, and it's something we discussed with my mum the other day.
Yeah. Staunch royalist.
She's not really, but part of me is like, yeah, you know, you shouldn't be made to have this kind of media speculation and everything be put on you.
Yeah.
And the thing for me is like Harry was born into it. It's not his fault. He never chose to be famous. Someone else who chose to be famous and then is upset with the backlash, that's, you could maybe say at that point, you know, you've made your bed.
Yeah.
So maybe, but the thing is like, the question is whether it's Meghan coming into the marriage and not liking the situation, or whether it's Harry actually saying, this is too much. He saw what happened to his mother. He's seen the negative effects of it, and he suffers from mental health. It's kind of like, what I mean, where are you with it?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because like I know a lot of people and like the kind of a lot of Marines are kind of speaking up saying that like they think he's like betrayed them, or but to be honest, I think he did 10 years. Was it 10 years of service he did?
I don't know exactly, but I know he did a lot. He's done a lot of good stuff.
And the whole Invictus Games thing.
Invictus Games is amazing as well.
Yeah, it's great. And I think he should be allowed to step back from the limelight. And I think it's difficult because they're saying the whole thing with them not being allowed to use their royal titles to earn money, but they're kind of there. It's like it's not really the titles; it's them. Do you know what I mean?
So, I want to get onto that in a sec because there's an article that I read that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
But just going back to the whole idea of like he should be allowed to step back. You know, he did work. He did serve in the army. He set up the Invictus Games. Is there not some part of it where you say like the lifestyle that they've been afforded, they should give back something
to the people?
Yeah, like is it a bit kind of like, for instance, I'm not a big monarchist, but I do.
Are you a round hat?
I don't know
Cromwell.
which one would be. Nah, I didn't like Cromwell either. He was a bit dictatorial, wasn't he? But I think that the Queen, like, you've got to respect the Queen. Like, she's ancient now. She's been...
It's treason otherwise.
yeah. But she's done a lot of work for the country, and she still travels so much and still does so much stuff. So I do respect her as a person. But it is kind of the debate about whether, like, realistically... I don't know, how much they had like a £2.5 million renovation on their house last year and stuff like that.
They said they're going to pay that back.
And and it's difficult because you're like, well, should they be allowed to leave, or do they owe something to the people, or maybe, and this is where I think it might go, after all the Cromwells and the gunpowder plots and everything, maybe Harry stepping back from this lifestyle, we're finally going to lose.
Could be the spark. Yeah.
Could be the spark that like brings down the monarchy, because realistically. And there are going to be people who disagree with me, but I think it's quite an outdated thing to have.
Yeah.
And maybe what Harry's doing inadvertently is highlighting how far society has moved, and how being born into this stuff isn't really appropriate.
Yeah. Because I always thought it was quite interesting kind of seeing the monarchy kind of go through all its different kind of stages. like kind of was it the 1930s and 40s? I think that's when they started doing the Queen's Speech.
That was the head of the BBC thought it would be a good way to connect the monarchy and the people.
Yeah, because like in I think it was around that time they did the first Queen's Speech, and then that's when the kind of media started like coming into the royal family, and it's quite interesting because nowadays you kind of see the royal family almost as kind of like they're like kind of tabloid news. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't engage with a lot of the stuff that goes on with them, and I think up until probably what's happening now with Harry and Meghan, and because I think it's maybe like an emblem of where we are at the moment in society. Maybe emblem's the wrong word, but it's like a talisman of what's happening. I've been paid a bit more attention, but like I couldn't tell you who the royals are. Like I can't name them. Like whenever it comes up in a pub quiz, it's like, can you name William's three
I'd completely
children?
forgotten about Andrew until recently.
Do you know what? Oh my god! Do you think it's a ploy to get people not thinking about Andrew?
What, this
thing?
do you think? Nah.
I mean, when was the last time
Maybe.
anyone said anything about Prince Andrew?
Well, no, I'm hearing it quite a bit still. I don't know.
He's definitely not in the news as much as he was.
That would be a really kind of long game kind of strategy.
Oh, well, they killed Diana, didn't they?
Well, I don't know.
We're getting a bit conspiracy theorist here at the moment.
Get on your tinfoil hats.
Yeah, but I mean, if it was conspiracy theories that we were looking at, I mean, that would be a
Yeah.
good way to divert traffic. But, no, I know what you mean. It's a difficult one. I mean, I think on a human level, I think they should be able to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether they are too entrenched in it
Yeah.
as a family. So the article that I was going to talk to you about, this is going back to making money and about being able to use the royal name or whatever.
Yeah.
So the Queen's grandson, a guy called Peter Phillips, who is royal by blood but not by title. So he doesn't have a royal name. He's Prince Anne's son. I don't know what that makes him to anyone in the royal family. But there's a Chinese television advertisement, unearthed by the Daily Mail, obviously, that shows him endorsing milk from Jersey cows
In China.
in China.
Okay.
At one point he
Were
says...
they lactose intolerant?
I thought that as well, but maybe that's why they need royalty to advertise it. As it says, at one point he says of the milk via a Chinese voiceover translated by BBC monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
it's fresh and it's what I want. Which is weird.
We'll just let that settle with you guys.
Yeah, and also it said the Mail revealed on Wednesday that another of Prince Harry's cousins... Okay, so I think he might be one of Prince Harry's cousins.
Okay.
Lady Kitty Spencer has also worked on a separate Chinese milk brand on a campaign partly filmed by the British Museum. I don't really know what that means. But essentially, it kind of calls into question, and there was like a former Home Office minister, a guy called Norman Baker, who kind of wrote an open letter to the government and the BBC saying that China shouldn't have been allowed to use the term like royal to describe him, because it says that he's a member of the royal family
Yeah.
on the advert. It's kind of so basically you're not allowed to use the fact that you're royal as an advertising tool or to make money.
Okay. But didn't Meghan and Harry, did they trademark the something to do with Sussex, the name?
So they have filed a, I don't know what it's called, like a legal action to trademark themselves.
Yeah. Is the Duke and Duchess?
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex is what they're called, and they've filed a trademark to trademark the Sussexes as an entity, and there's a chance that they could use that for kind of earning money themselves. It says at the moment 95% of their income comes from Prince Charles's Duchy of Cornwall, and that kind of pays for their public duties and stuff. But it was also saying that potentially that they could kind of do other things, and like there could be like TV deals. So one of the things it referenced was the fact that Meghan Markle has signed a contract with Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Oh no, it was Disney. You're
Disney,
right.
yeah.
In return for a
Charity donation, isn't it?
yeah, it was a charity to. It says here how so it's an article by the BBC. How could the couple make money? And it's talking about kind of commercial partnerships. So they potentially got a royal brand. They could use that to sell books, calendars, clothing, charitable fundraising. They both do a lot of charitable stuff as is.
Yeah.
I don't know how they could change that charitable stuff into them actually earning money.
Well, I think they could go the way of like the Obamas and like the Clintons.
But this is what it says here. It says so. There has been that reference that they could do like what the Clinton Foundation do, the Obama Foundation do, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation do.
Yeah.
But the Clintons say they draw no income or expenses from their charity. I mean, whether that's true or not, we don't know. Josh famously anti-Clinton. The Obamas are not listed among their foundation's highest paid officers. I don't really know what that means. I mean, maybe they get a bit of money, but it's mostly for charity. Yeah. And the Gates famously use their organisation to give away wealth rather than to receive it, end quote. So,
I mean, if anyone doesn't need it.
Yeah, so it's difficult. I mean, the thing that I wonder about is how do you go, like how... Is there a way that they can maintain their current lifestyle?
I don't know, because I think what they were planning on doing was public talks and stuff.
This was in the article was saying that they could make, there was one bit here about a book deal. It said that a book deal that was done with Barack and Michelle Obama was believed to be worth about $60 million. Again, this is all on this BBC article. And there was a public speaking thing, and there was a guy, Jeremy Lee, who works at the speaking agency JLA, said that potentially in America, not so much in the UK, but in America, they could earn up to $500,000 if the pair of them went and did an engagement. But he did say that the UK, his opinion was that the UK companies would be more sensitive to reputational risks and would maybe more likely do a donation to one of their charities than necessarily give them direct money. But it's very difficult because I think you've got. It's like could they become TV personalities? Would that be really weird?
Well, she already was one, so I guess maybe she could go back, but I don't know how. Yeah.
But for me, she wasn't like a TV personality as much as she was an actress or an actor. Sorry, she was an actor who was on a big show. Yeah. So do they get their own do they get the Late Show with Harry and Meghan? Do you know what I mean? Like,
so what are you coming out with?
Yeah, that'd be so crazy. Can you imagine?
Yeah, that would be pretty nuts. Imagine they had their own reality show, like the Kardashians, the Sussexes.
Oh my god! Yeah, like people would love that. Can you imagine?
Indeed, everyone who subscribes to the Sun would just go off their fucking.
Can you imagine how much money that would make?
Yeah.
Essentially, the UK's answer to the Kardashians is the Sussexes.
Oh God.
They leave the royalty to
become TV.
Yeah. I used to be a princess. Now I'm a queen. Oh God, Jesus, that would be mental.
Yeah.
I don't know where you go with it, but it is interesting.
Yeah. Oh, that would be crazy. Yeah, I don't really know what kind of direction they're going to take after this. It would be interesting to see what they do.
I wonder if she'll go back into acting.
Yeah.
Or if... Because I guess essentially what they're going to become is kind of professional philanthropists. Philanthropists?
Philanthropy.
Yeah, professional philanthropists.
Yeah.
But you need to have like a vast... Like most of the people who do that have independent wealth.
Yeah.
So maybe they just still get the money from the royal family. And then
how much is it he got from his mum?
I don't know exactly. I mean, he got a few bob.
Yeah, it was quite a few million, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think that they'll still get money from Charles. Like I imagine, because they can call that just family money.
Yeah.
So they're not getting money from the royal estate. They're getting money, even though if it's from the Crown Duchy of Lancashire or whatever. But I guess that's just their own money.
Yeah. Not sure.
But yeah, so it's interesting debate. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll follow up on it again some later time when there's more information on it. But I guess at the moment, my general feeling is, I think more than anything, I'm just interested to see where it goes. And the one thing for me that I wonder about is whether, if the main aim of what they're doing is to get away from media attention, if this will actually do anything positive for them.
Yeah, I don't know, because it definitely does single them out a lot more than they were before, I'm assuming. Because I remember that people were talking about how was it Meghan's getting a lot more negative attention than Kate did.
Yeah.
And
maybe
that was one of the
is it
motives.
because she's black?
Do you think that is? Yeah, I think so.
Is it because she's not of...
or she's American maybe as well, that makes her stand out.
Is she American or is she Canadian?
She's American, I think.
Yeah, maybe she just works in Canada. I know she lived in Canada for a long time.
Yeah.
But maybe it's the fact that she's like, because even Kate, I don't know if Kate was like...
She definitely wasn't black.
No, she definitely wasn't black. But I think she was, if she wasn't of like landed gentry, they still met at St Andrews. So she was still pretty posh.
Yeah.
So she was maybe a lot more... Because I think there was maybe something about around the time that William and Kate got married that it was like, oh, she's not landed gentry.
Mm.
It was like, oh no, but she's lovely. She went to a good school and she's white. Whereas like Harry married like mixed race American woman.
No. But the thing I was just kind of saying about that was that there's a lot of things that single them out.
Yeah.
Apart from the royal, like being like royals, obviously, but like among the kind of royal circle, like they kind of stand out, and especially with this, it'll make them stand out a hell of a lot more.
Do you think it is the media just genuinely being that racist?
Probably, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. Anything to get people riled up.
Do you think it's because it sells more newspapers? Ultimately?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's just like, was it online nowadays? What sells is what makes you angry, or what makes you click is what kind of makes you interact a lot more. That's what social media companies have realised.
It isn't, because the one thing that you've got to wonder is that the people who are the most invested in the royals are most likely to be the more conservative, potentially greyer pound voter or more conservative leaning voter.
Yeah.
So they're more likely to have these kind of less progressive views.
Mm.
So maybe that's why it's easier to... And why the public perception is maybe more negative of Meghan, even though there's a chance that it could be, for all we know, this is completely Harry's decision. She was like, look, let's just tough it out. And he was like, no, I want to get out, blah, blah, blah. But the media is just turning on her because she's a much easier target.
No.
Because realistically, she is a much easier target than him.
Yeah.
Because he is a royal, he's a son of like Diana, who's the people's princess and everything. Everybody loved her.
No.
So he's a much more difficult target to shoot at.
Yeah.
Not like... to aim at, basically, with your media bias or whatever, than she is.
Yeah. Well, because I think... I remember a couple of people talking about how I think she's done this before or something. I'm not sure about the facts behind it.
Yeah.
But, like, apparently she left her family and she doesn't speak to them. And I think she married someone before and left them and they basically sent her ring to him in the mail without ever like speaking to him again. And I think they basically, I remember definitely Piers Morgan was talking about this.
Of course, Piers Morgan was talking about this. Jesus.
Yeah, he was saying that she's like a social climber and that they used to be good friends. And before she married Prince Harry, she came and like had lunch with him or something. And
with Piers Morgan.
With Piers Morgan, yeah, in London. And then whenever she got married, she like never spoke to him again and just we called her like a social climber basically.
Yeah.
So I guess like stuff like that would definitely get her a lot of negative attention, but I don't know how true all that kind of stuff is.
I guess it could be interesting to see when we look back in time when
we're rich and famous.
Not us personally when we look back in time and to see how much we've social climbed. Yeah. But I mean when we as a people, as a nation or whatever, look back in time and everything becomes clearer, the further away from the point you are. Well, often, not all the time.
Yeah.
To see what was the driving factors behind this.
No.
Because, I mean, you say that she left her family, but by all intents and purposes, her dad seems like a fucking nightmare. I mean, he's willing to testify against her.
No.
in a case that she's brought against the Daily Mail where they posted private letters.
No.
I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I tend to not side with the Daily Mail. It's a personal opinion. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions, but that's not mine.
Yeah.
And he's willing to come across from America and testify against his own daughter. So I can imagine there was definitely some... Not even that it was butthurt, or just maybe the reason she left was because it was toxic.
Yeah, maybe.
Like,
she decided to join the royal family.
Yeah, famously.
A much more healthy environment.
But I guess the one thing that they do have, though, is if you're at least maybe being part of the royal family, if they've stayed part of the royal family, they have the rest of the family as support. They have the Queen. They have all the power that comes with that stuff. They have the complete loyalists who will support them either way.
Yeah.
And maybe by going out on your own, is it brave or is it stupid? That kind of age-old question. Is it brave to say, we don't want to be part of this age-old entity, we want to kind of strike out and do our own thing, but then they lose some of the support? And I mean, they may gain...
Sorry, go on.
No, well, sorry. They may gain supporters.
Yeah.
Like, I think if they can do it, and they can do it well, I think I would be a fan, and I'm not currently a fan, so they might gain support. But how influential I'm going to be, I'd probably be a supporter like, oh yeah, good for them. I'm not going to be the ones tweeting them like, fuck you guys.
Getting the Union Jack tattooed to the back of your thigh,
yeah. What were you going to say?
I forgot.
Don't worry about it.
It was good.
It was good.
Very good.
All right. Well, we move on to the censorship. So another thing that we started talking about the other week, but we kind of had to cut a bit short. But I think would be interesting for us to talk about because I think it's something that we're relatively invested in as well.
Definitely.
Was the internet? Yeah. So it was something you wanted to bring up, Josh. So why don't you kind of give us a brief overview of?
I can indeed.
What it is that we're going to talk about here.
Yeah. So what we're going to talk about here is Britain is supposed to be bringing in the toughest internet laws that exist, apparently. Slightly less brutal, I imagine, than North Korea and China, but they're planning on making
We've got to compete somehow with those guys.
Yeah. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of tame, as they say in The Guardian, tame the internet's wild west. And would you agree that that's a bit of in a wild place right now?
I think, personally, the internet is one of those things, it should be viewed as a tool. And like anything that has any real human interaction, it gets quite easily corrupted.
Yeah, definitely.
There's so much great stuff on the internet. I mean, even what we were talking about earlier, setting up this podcast, the amount of tutorials online and stuff that we could learn and free tutorials and free articles on websites and free things that we can use to produce the content that we create personally is all out there and all very accessible as long as you have internet connection. And for that stuff, it's absolutely brilliant. And as you were saying earlier on, in our parents' generation, if you wanted to learn something, you might have had to go to a library. We have so much access now to information that we're so much... Maybe are we more knowledgeable of the world probably than our parents were? Yes.
We're definitely more aware of what's going on everywhere. You're not sure whether that makes you happier or not.
Well, it goes back to the old discussion that we always have about is it Aristotle's cave?
Plato's cave. Yeah.
Plato's cave that we always have, and you always say that you would want to be released from the cave and want to go out and
I'll give you a brief summary of what the cave is. So basically, Plato had this idea where basically imagine a cave where 4 people are chained up facing a wall, and behind them there is sometimes there's a fire burning in a bridge, and sometimes it's just the opening of the cave that basically shines light. And all the people see are the shadows on the wall that they're chained, facing. And everything that kind of passes by the cave or walks past the fire creates these shadows on the wall, and basically because these people, this is all they've ever known, they believe that is reality. And one day, one of the prisoners breaks free, and he runs out into the like wild, the real world, and he sees what is actually real, and he sees that things aren't just a reflection on the wall, that they're actually three-dimensional things with color, and his mind is blown and stuff. So that's the idea of basically being freed from the cave. Is basically kind of, it's very similar to the kind of the idea in the Matrix, taking is it the blue pill, the red
Yeah,
pill?
the blue or the red pill.
Blue and the red pill, yeah.
I don't know which one is right, but it doesn't matter. The point still stands. Yeah.
No.
Do you want to know reality in its true form, or are you happy with kind of what has been prescribed to you? But a little bit like in the Matrix, there's the scene with the guy who kind of sells them down the river,
Yeah.
and in exchange he gets to stay in like a lovely house and he gets to eat steak, and he knows it's not real, but he has he's able to quantify his own happiness that way. And the thing that we've talked about previously, when we've talked about the world and kind of authoritarian governments and being told stuff, and what we learn in our school books, is it true, or is it like, history's written by the victors?
No.
Is it what a ruling elite has told us and we disagree with it, or should we be fact checking them, and should we be pushing back against this? And it's something we've discussed a lot personally between us. Wow, that's a big pipe or something. I don't know.
Souped up.
Yeah. And you've always said that you would push back and you want to find out what true reality is. And I've always said that, well, does that make you happier? And I guess it's really what your outcome in life is to be. And mine is at the moment, for someone who hasn't always been happy personally, it's looking to be as happy as I can be. And does that involve, maybe being ignorant to some degree, potentially?
Well, that's what a lot of philosophers say, is that's what happiness is ignorance.
And maybe it is. And maybe if you truly understood the harshness of the world, it would be horrible.
I guess that's kind of what the internet's done as well, is it's kind of created like a world where you can see all the misery going around the world. So it does kind of relate back to that kind of happiness and ignorance thing, because it makes you wonder whether you would actually be happier not knowing all the countless amounts of suffering around the world. Whether that would make your life actually happier.
And you look at it when you're on these social media platforms, and you're on Instagram's probably the one I use the most. I don't really use Facebook very much anymore, and I'm not very active on Twitter. And you can kind of curtail it so that you only see nice food and pretty people and people having fun and fun things, and it becomes an echo chamber that can make you think that those are all the things in the world, but that can be positive and negative, because you can look at all these nice things and think, oh, the world is full of nice things, or you can think, I don't have these nice things, why do I not have these nice things? And so it is a very difficult debate, and that's why I try to think of it for myself as a tool, and it's like I try to direct myself to the things that are positive about it, but maybe that's an ignorant way to use the internet.
No, it's difficult to say, because it makes your life a lot easier, like we were saying earlier on, to have this wide kind of plethora of information you can take from.
And that you can tap into from essentially anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think one of the main things that Matt Hancock, the culture secretary, is trying to do with this predominantly, he's saying, is protecting children online. And as we talked about in a previous podcast, there is about 30% of the content online is porn, supposedly, from a Google search. That's what it said.
Indeed.
There's a huge amount of negative stuff online, but not even just negative content. What we also talked about before, which I think was a really interesting point, was we kind of discussed what we thought was the right way to allow children access to the internet.
Yeah.
And do we think that kids should have unwielding access? Should they be restricted? What are the issues with restriction, and who decides restriction?
Yeah.
So, what were your thoughts on that? Do you think that there should be restrictions on children? Who do you think should decide the restrictions on children? At what point should it be restricted and should it not?
I definitely agree that the internet should be restricted for younger people, and I think it's damaging because people always say that it's not really your parents that raise you, it's like their friends and their environment, and so technically nowadays it's the internet raising your children, especially if when you see all these kids with like iPads glued in front of them and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's part of their environment now. It's part of
their environment, and that's where they'll be getting a lot of the information. That's where they'll be doing the majority of their learning. Will be online and being exposed to things. And I know that I can't move on the internet for porn. Like it's everywhere, especially on streaming sites and stuff like that. And it must be really difficult for parents to kind of keep their children away from it. Not even just like viewing kind of porn, but just kind of like dangerous content, or just kind of like seeing like disgusting videos or things that would affect a child. And I think that we should be doing what we can to protect even just their innocence, and
but then
keep them away from it.
And that's a good point to start on, and I do agree with you, but what we kind of said before and kind of the angle that I took on it a little bit more was you're in a very difficult position at the moment as a parent trying to work out how to deal with an ever-evolving beast almost in its own sense, that even regulators and the government don't really understand how to deal with the internet, and it's why something like this is such a big step for a government to be taking.
If the Mark Zuckerberg trials are anything to go by.
Yeah, well, that's one thing. Yeah, we watched the Mark Zuckerberg trials, and you had incidences where you had these kind of senators or legal professionals who are maybe in their 70s or 80s with amazing stellar careers behind them, but they don't understand.
They're asking how to send an email on the WhatsApp.
Yeah, like stuff like that. They just don't. What does a like mean?
No.
Can I dislike stuff? And it's like, no, it's not that simple. And if you haven't been on the platform, you don't understand it. I mean, the other day I was at the pub with some of the people that I work with, and some of them were showing me TikTok. I've never seen TikTok before. Mm-hmm. And I'd say I'm like, I know what it is, but I've never actually physically seen it and interacted with it. And at one point I was scrolling down and I was watching something and they were like, oh no, that's an ad. Like, ignore it. And I felt kind of stupid, but also like that's how easy it could be to be advertised to on a platform like that.
Yeah.
So it's not even necessarily like porn, which is obviously quite a big grabbing topic because, sexualizing children and having them have access to sexual material at such a young age is terrible. But also things like advertising and, issues
political
with
stuff, like
political
Cambridge
stuff.
Analytica,
Yeah, like stuff like when you think about like terrorist groups, with propaganda and stuff like that, and maybe not even terrorist groups, also kind of like all the Russia scandal influencing our politics. Like, how do you regulate that stuff?
It's like also on top of that, like the kind of seeing how we were talking about earlier on how social media and the internet and even like news companies now, media, they all kind of move towards angering people and kind of like keeping this kind of like paranoid atmosphere because it keeps you engaged and keeps you reading more, and it makes you wonder whether we'll be raising a generation of paranoid people, or people that are just angry about everything because that's all they see is they're exposed to this kind of anger or this.
And so, but the opposite part of that is if you don't allow someone access to this, do they lose out? Are they not at the same level as their peers? If we take an incident where the pair of us had, 10-year-old kids, and one of them was allowed access to the internet, the other one wasn't, on the parents' demands, does then, say, my child who doesn't have access to the internet, and they go and, meet up for a play date with your kid, and like your kid's talking about stuff my kid doesn't understand, do they feel inferior? Do they feel stupid? Do they feel unconnected? Because especially in younger people, we see that this interaction is becoming more and more online. I think we're of a generation now a little bit where we are kind of in this kind of limbo hotspot of understanding the brilliance that connectivity can bring, but also wanting to have kind of more personal relationships because we see how negative connectivity can be, and we're trying to do more stuff where we interact with each other and we have conversations and getting back to those kind of older ways and the campfire that you've talked about and the hearth that Neil Gaiman talks about in some of his books, going back in time. But if you're in the younger generation, do you lose out, and does that alienation cause even more social anxiety than some of the bullying that goes on? Because one of the things we also said was, back in the day when me and you were kids, if you went to school and there was a bully, which we both got bullied in our own rights, you would get bullied at school, but you could go home and it was gone. And you didn't have to face it until 9 o'clock the next day. And you could go home and you could talk to your mum and dad about it, and you could say stuff like this, and you could be away from that, and you could be with the friends that you want to be with. But now that all these kids have Facebook, they're getting constantly bullied all the time. And the thing is as well is there's so many instances where like people's age on Facebook is wrong because you had to be 16 to have Facebook. They just lied. They can't prove anything. They're not asking for photo ID. It's not like a bar or a club.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, when I first set up my Facebook account, I was very paranoid they were going to find out that I wasn't 18. Even though back then, unless they introduced something like this, what they're planning on doing, they would never have known, really.
Yeah. But it is worrying, and I worry about the impact that it has. I worry about the impact it has on me, and I've done quite a lot of work to try and not get upset by it. But I think that if you're a bit younger and you're in that kind of development stage of your life, because we were kind of on the cusp of the internet becoming the behemoth that it is today. Because I think we still had some of our innocence, but when we were kind of
Facebook, and that it was 2007, I think it started.
Yeah, so I was 13, and we didn't use it for a bit. We kind of got it
for 5 years.
We used it underage, I think, but yeah, it's mad, man. But going back to the actual kind of what it was saying was, some of the stats are pretty scary. It was saying that 4 in 10 kind of people done in the survey, the Internet Safety Green Paper, 4 in 10 experience online abuse and 60% witnessed inappropriate content. Like that, those are huge numbers. Like huge numbers. But the other point of it is, where do we put the safeguards in?
This is an interesting debate, this one.
So this is the debate that we kind of said, well, do you put the safeguards in before the content gets to the UK? So do you create this kind of internet bubble that's geographically in the UK, even though the internet doesn't have a geographical base? And how do you regulate that, and how difficult is it to do that? And with the rise of people getting personal VPNs, like, how many people can just very easily bypass that? Because I imagine that, as we've seen with the internet before, if you create safeguards and barriers, then the internet will find ways to get around it, and it will be a constant and extremely expensive battle for the government to regulate that. Or do you regulate it at a base level, which says that when you're logging on to the Great Wide Web, which still has all the content that it has now available to it, there's more restrictions at the log-on point? Where do you draw the line?
I'm not sure. This is difficult to say that one. Because it makes you wonder whether they'd start kind of tailoring the internet just for the UK, like for example in like China and stuff that they do. But then I guess that doing something like that would open up the doors in the future for kind of like controlling what people see. And this is the kind of it's the fine line you have to walk between keeping people, and especially children, safe online and still being able to keep the kind of freedom of expression and the freedom of movement of like information, and then when you start to kind of control that, it becomes, like they said, it becomes less of a wild west, but then it also becomes less free.
Well, that's what I said to you last week was once, and this is maybe the kind of conspiracy theorist pushback part of me, and it's definitely something that you fostered in me.
No.
To kind of have these questions, but one of the wonders that you have is, and it's just being skeptical, is are the government using a platform of child safety to put general government controls on the internet? And do you get a situation where we have an internet regulator that is the government, and if the government is regulating the internet, then how far do they go? Do they just regulate, it talks a lot about pornographic and abusive content, but does it also regulate anti-government sentiment? Does it regulate kind of fresh freedoms? Does it regulate people wanting to expose officials and kind of, because the press going back in time was meant to ask these questions. But we see more and more today that potentially the press have for a very long time been controlled by a small elite or whatever.
Not even necessarily like controlled, like because if you think about they want to have the interaction with these people. So like big businesses or like famous celebrities or even the royal family or whatever, they need to have like access to that information. And if you start posting stuff negatively against them or going against what these kind of people want, and they're not going to give you the access that you want. So it's kind of like a cooperation thing.
But if we say that the kind of traditional press are kind of it, maybe you could argue that the traditional press are almost regulated in this way currently. It's very difficult to go into and I read a book by what's his name,
Alex Jones?
No, he's Owen Jones is his name.
Oh shit!
Similarly, Owen Jones. He's a very pro-Labour writer. He's a newspaper columnist at the moment. He's a political commentator, and he kind of wrote a book called The Establishment, and it was kind of calling out some of these things. I mean, he's very left, and some of the stuff you have to take with a pinch of salt. But there's obviously some interesting stuff in it as well. But one of the things he said was that he talked to a journalist who was at a paper, and basically the journalist kind of left that life because the paper was kind of dictating what he was writing, and he didn't feel like that was what he wanted to do. So the internet kind of came as a remedy a bit for that, because people have platforms. I mean, it's a little bit like us now talking and having this platform where, I mean, very little people potentially will hear this, but we still have the platform because of the internet and because of the free tools on the internet to be able to give our opinion on some of these debates. Whereas before that, you wouldn't have that. And then you run the risk with this regulation of, do they then stop allowing people like us being able to maybe challenge some of these decisions? Like, is my view that I just came up with there then that I wonder and I worry that there's the potential for them using the cover of protecting children to regulate other things on the internet? Is that then a kind of opinion and a debate that doesn't happen online because of the regulation? So that's the worry at the moment.
Yeah, it makes you, definitely, because something like protecting children, that would be something that everyone can get behind, and because it's really does make you wonder whether they'd be able to kind of control what people think. Because if you think about it, like we were talking about with kind of traditional media, like the newspapers and the TV reporters and stuff like that, they would be kind of like censored, and like they wouldn't be able to say like everything that they'd want to say, because it has to obviously go through like tons of like editors and stuff like that. But nowadays on the internet, everything's kind of like free, and you can kind of like put up what you want. And it makes you wonder whether something like this would kind of turn new media into kind of what the old media was.
That's kind of basically what I just said, Does it move us into that? But does it move in the way that the printed press originally going back in time had that revolutionary, and you look at things like kind of during the French Revolution, there was, the kind of Grub Street writers, and there was all the pamphleteers. I mean, the original kind of pamphleteer was Martin Luther, who started the Reformation. He basically wrote something. He wrote the issues that he had with the Catholic Church. He nailed it to a church door, and then you see everything that happened from that. And then you had these kind of pamphleting became very important, and there was a lot of people kind of writing political dissent and stuff, especially in Europe during that time when you had Protestant writers and you had Catholic apologists and you had all this kind of stuff going on, and people writing against each other and kind of all that. And that's kind of trickled through to where we're at now. But as time has gone on, the powers that be have spent more and more time consolidating these things so that you believe, or you're kind of just given certain types of news. It's the issues with fake news all over again.
Yeah, it's like this whole argument with Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, because like people have argued before that they've kind of become the public square.
Yeah.
And people being kind of banned from it, or for example, if they kind of like say something that kind of goes against the terms and conditions, then they'll be kicked out of the public square essentially, and not be able to kind of participate in kind of like in public discourse. And if we kind of expand that to the whole of the internet, then it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens with that, whether we will be able to still talk about stuff, because everything everyone views and everything everyone thinks, it's all controlled by the internet now. And we saw with Cambridge Analytica that you can tailor someone's view of the world, because everyone's individual Facebook account or Twitter account, it's tailored per person so that you all see what they would want you to see.
Yeah.
So they could completely control, with something like this, it would be a step closer towards that kind of controlling of information and how people think.
Well, maybe the argument goes that currently, if we're using the current public squares are being run by the Facebooks and the Twitters, and maybe this movement from the government means that the public squares will run more by the government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then you get into an argument which is who has our best intentions at heart.
Yeah.
And you would like to think it was the government. And so on a purely, base entry level debate about this, with the whole like the big hack that was on Netflix, which was all about the Cambridge Analytica stuff and Facebook, and it's basically followed a guy who wanted to get his information back from Facebook. He took them to multiple legal disputes, and they basically just didn't turn up. They ignored him, which is crazy to think about it. I think he's still fighting them at the moment.
Yeah.
Really interesting guy. You should go and check out the big hack on Netflix. Very good.
Didn't they say he was never going to get it back because he had as much right as a terrorist living in a cave to his public information?
Yeah, there was some crazy statement like that. I think they tried to give him some money, but he didn't want it. He just wanted his information back. But the basic point really is that they were ultimately selling information, and it's selling advertising, basically. It's using social media to advertise. So if the government takes back control of that town square, then we aren't getting advertised through Facebook? Are we getting advertised through the government? Because ultimately, it is a space to be advertised to, and as you see with so many of these free online forums, the way you get free access to them is because you're the product. And it was the phrase that you said to me before once, is you're basically selling your freedom for advertising rights. So you get free access to these, quote unquote great social media things like Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter, like whatever, MySpace, Bebo, or whatever those old ones were. But in turn, you're being advertised to, and they are funneling information at you. And so it's a great platform for that. And even, I imagine, in China, where they don't have access from outside influence, I'm sure it's Weibo, isn't it? Is that what it's called?
I think so, yeah.
That's what we looked at the other day. It's Weibo that they have internally, which is kind of like WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, all wrapped into one. I imagine still that because that's regulated by the government, that the government will use it to some degree for advertising. Because it's a great platform for it. And ultimately, if you don't use it for that, is it being used in the wrong way? What's the point in social media?
it'd be interesting to see what kind of way they go with this. Whether it'll just be because I know that this is kind of mainly focused at kind of protecting children, but it's also it's going to limit the amounts of kind of extreme porn available to Brits, and there was a couple of other things. It was bullying. I think bullying children and stuff like that were the main points of this. But it'll be interesting to see how much of the censoring or how deep into censoring that they will go. Kind of censoring just like information in general.
And it'd be interesting to see how much we know or even see the censoring. I mean,
because we wouldn't know, would we?
Is it a case that we, like, the people are a part of the censoring, and you can call out bullying where you see it? Is it made, or do they put pressures on places like Facebook to call out trolling and call out people being negative and rude and sexists, racists, homophobic or anything online? Do they give more power to the people? But then the issue that you've got with that is then, do you create a lynch mob when you do something like that?
It's
it's an interesting debate because I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you censor it more than it currently is. And how do you get it to be censored, or do we just don't see this stuff anymore?
It'll be interesting to see if kind of a lot of a bunch of different countries kind of follow suit and do the same thing, and then because you have like a different experience for different countries depending on, like, I guess what their values are and what their laws dictate. Because then you can hop over to America and then see the kind of the internet. Maybe perhaps it's freest because I know their freedom of speech laws, and it's a very integral part of the American system. So I imagine they'd probably continue giving as much kind of like freedom to the people as possible, I imagine.
And I think coming full circle then, do we get back to a cave situation, and you get to a situation where the internet becomes a happier, friendlier, less aggressive porn, less bullying, less inappropriate content, like, you don't have access to, like, the Jihadi John beheadings and some of the really horrible stuff, which I've never watched, but I know there are kids who definitely watch stuff like that. Do you get to a situation where that stuff is off the menu, but you are kind of seeing a reflection of what is really out there, and how deadly is the beast, and how much does it need to be tamed, or is there any way to have it in its pure form, or is it too dangerous as it is? And there are so many instances where we think about now with cultures like incel culture as well, which is really quite despicable. But some of the things that they say, I think there are a lot of people who are incels who are incredibly lost and have found an online community where they feel some sense of community and feel less alienated. But then, like some of these countercultural fractured groups, there is a lot of negativity in that. If you limit access to stuff like that, where do some of these people turn? I'm not saying that there should be safe spaces for people with such misogynistic views, but just taking the incels as one case, if you don't have these outlets, then where does it go? But then maybe, I mean, the argument is if the government regulate things more and then they have more control over the advertising, they make more money through the advertising, and then they can put that money back into public services that help people in that situation. But whether that will be the case, I don't know.
I'll be interested to see whether the government can keep ahead of kind of people of our kind of generation who are a lot more kind of tech savvy than I'd assume a lot of the people in these positions would be. Like, for example, if it turns into something like the synthetic drug war, where
it's a very good point. Yeah,
you basically just change one of the or one of the atoms in the.
No, it's part of the chemical compound.
Yeah, change a little something every time, and then it becomes further from what it originally was, but you get to keep ahead of.
I think to contextualize that, just to give it an example, I think that cannabis is something like H4C8O2.
Yeah.
And these kind of fake cannabinoids on the market, what they've done is they've added an additional hydrogen or carbon or oxygen
So then that
molecule.
Strain isn't exactly illegal.
Isn't illegal.
Yeah.
No. So they have banned exactly H4C8O2, but H4C8O3 is not illegal.
Yeah.
And then the issue that you get with these legal highs is that it takes maybe 6 months to a year for the government to ban the new version, and then they create an additional version, and what you get is the kind of stuff that's on the market now is so loosely connected to
what originally
the
was,
drug that it's synthesizing, I guess, the synthetic drug that it's trying to be, that it can be potentially harmful. And you see things like the documentary about Spice in Bristol and stuff like that, and some of these legal highs are incredibly deadly and really bad for you. I think it's totally possible. And where you put the portal for access to this information, it becomes, difficult to regulate. Because again, if we're saying that the portal is, if they kind of create like a internal UK internet, there'll be a way to bypass it. Create a VPN and say you're in France and you'll be able to get it. How I think it's a step in the right direction, but are we maybe getting to a point where we realise that we can't fight the internet?
No, it's the genie's been let out of his bottle now. There's no putting it back in.
Exactly. Is it too powerful? Is it ultimately too powerful, too big, and too fast moving for anything to tame it?
No.
And especially when you get kind of a bit of a brain drain for the technologically savvy into these big firms like the Googles and all that like that, and what is it, Alphabet, who own Google and all the different ones? I think it is, yeah. Alphabet's the name of the company that own Google and a couple of other ones, a couple of the other big tech companies. And if they have all the most talented people, how do governments combat them?
No, because they're definitely a hell of a lot more powerful than governments are. Like Twitter has a lot more power than the American government, because they can just go anywhere. They're not held to a specific.
Yeah, I remember
country.
when Dad worked in Ireland, and the flat that he was put in for the work that he was doing there was in a newly developed area, Dublin, and it was where the Google headquarters were for Europe, because they had lower corporation tax.
Definitely. I think a lot of people go to Ireland.
Amazon's got a big place in Dublin, and there's quite a few other big places in Dublin. Corporation tax is lower in Dublin's, in Ireland as a whole. There's a lot of pharmaceutical companies in Ireland as well. So, but like,
you just need to nuke Ireland and that'll solve the whole world's problems.
No, we won't do that. Not my family, my people. But if Ireland changed that, they'd move. They'd move somewhere else, and they have that ability. They have the money, and I mean, do you think you'll ever get a situation where these tech companies have private armies? Like in some of the films that you watch about the future, and Skycore in Terminator and stuff like that.
It'll be really interesting to see where we'll be in kind of like, I don't know, 20 years time, because we might all just be living in, like, the idea of kind of like Facebook and Twitter might be antiquated ideas, and maybe there's like a VR thing that we all plug into and we can just meet in this public square and just interact, play games, I don't know, like climb Mount Everest, something like that. And then in that situation, they wouldn't really even need an army, because they'd have the power. Like, literally, we'd be in their world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, VR is quite scary.
And it's come on leaps and bounds.
It is coming on leaps and bounds.
It's crazy.
And maybe VR is something we can talk about in the future, and maybe that's something that we
Let us know if you want us to have a wee conversation about that.
Yeah. Please get involved and get in touch with us on our Twitter at RTTW Josh and Darragh, and we've also got a YouTube channel, Round the Table with Josh and Darragh as well. We've
Give
got
us a
all
wee
our
subscribe.
podcasts on. Please give us a subscribe. Please give us a like. It really lets us know that you're enjoying it and makes us keep wanting to do it.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll wrap it up there for today then, Josh.
Yeah.
I think it was a really interesting talk. We
I
got
enjoyed
got through everything from me being trapped in the toilet to
Solving the world's internet problems.
yeah, to the royals and to the internet.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot,
Thrones
guys.
to thrones.
Exactly. No, do you know what? Great way to end. Great way to end. Well, thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, guys. For all the latest news about the podcast, find us at RTTW Josh and Darragh on Instagram. Bye.
Bye.